Good morning, Wabash. Hello. Speaking today at Pioneer Chapel is Dr. Daniel Rogers with his talk titled 1,238,722 Steps. Dr. Rogers joined the faculty of Wabash College in 1998 after completing a PhD in Spanish literature at the University of Kansas. He has published over 20 articles and book chapters on Latin American literature and film. Next semester, he will teach his popular course, A History of Mexican Film, as well as Spanish 103, also known by many students as the course that made me love Spanish. Dr. Rogers has chaired more departments at Wabash College than any professor in its history. But, as Wabash students well know, he is best known for being the husband of the pre-health advisor. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Rogers.
Good morning, Wabash. Now, you probably couldn't tell, but I actually wrote the bio. So, and yeah, I am including a shameless plug for History of Mexican Film next semester. A course I really enjoy teaching. And I'll include another shameless plug at the end of this chapel talk. And the reason I don't feel guilty was I got an email at 7:30 Tuesday morning, all caps in the subject line, right? Urgent, Dr. Rogers. Could you please give a chapel talk on Thursday? And I'm happy to. I'm happy to. So here we go. Fitbits, Garmin's, Apple Watches. Raise your hand if you have any one of these, right? A Fitbit, a Garmin, an Apple Watch that you use either in daily life or when you're exercising. Everyone's talking about health trackers and steps these days. At least people my age are. The Mayo Clinic says that I need to get in 10,000 steps a day to reduce the risk of common health problems. They say that Mayo Health, that's like the authority, right? They say they recommend 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity exercise, such as brisk walking. But wait, the very reliable insider.com says the opposite. This number of steps isn't important at all. So, to heck with them. I did the experiment. This past summer, my wife, your amazing pre-health advisor, and I joined former President Hess and his wife Laura, and some of you know this, some of you may not. We walked across Spain, not figuratively, not metaphorically. We actually walked from one side of Spain to the other. Thank you. Thank you. A total of 800 kilometers, or for those of you who are metric system averse, 500 miles. That's like starting at the chapel steps right here, and of course there's an internet site that does this for you, right? It helps you figure this out. Like starting from the chapel steps and walking to Washington, D.C. Or, it turns out, to Tulsa, Oklahoma, home of one of our freshman kickers. Or Crawfordsville to the border of South Carolina. And that gentleman took me almost 1.25 million steps, because I carried my iPhone with me the whole time. On January 24th, the first day, I beat the Mayo Clinic recommendation and walked 41,744 steps, 17.3 miles. And on that cool, you have to imagine this cool, misty, morning in southern France at the foot of the Pyrenees after a fine breakfast of coffee and croissants. We took off and we hiked to the top of the Pyrenees, an elevation change of 4,300 meters. And I can see Dean Redding in the back saying, that's 4,300 meters, 17 miles, you slacker. But gentlemen, I'm not you may not know this, I'm not a cross-country runner. The next day, I walked 46,027 steps, according to my iPhone, 19.7 miles, all the way back down the other side of the Pyrenees into Spain, and so on and so on. It's one thing to hike 17 miles in a day. Raise your hand if you've walked or you think you could, everyone here could walk 17 miles in a day, right? You've done that. But it's a really different thing to walk that far and get up and do it again the next day. And the next, and the next. 10 days into this thing, on that 10th day, I only walked 36,000 steps. That was a 15-mile day. And at that point, we were still a week away from the halfway point, 10 days in. The halfway point of what, you ask? The Camino de Santiago. In Spanish, camino means path or way. It's the noun that's related to the verb caminar. And it also lends its name to the Chevy El Camino. The only utility vehicle I've ever really wanted to own. We generally translate Santiago today as James. Have some of you heard of that? That Santiago means James? Well, it does, but it actually means Saint James. And you can hear that in the beginning of the word, right? Santiago. The last part is a bit curious. Iago. Iago means James, you ask? Isn't Iago the name of that annoying parrot voiced by Gilbert Gottfried in that one Disney movie? May he rest in peace. Iago is from the Latin name Iacobus, and then from the ancient Greek, Iacobus, and then from the Hebrew, Jacob, what we would call Jacob today. Jacob, literally heel, I love this, heel grabber, right? In Genesis, it tells us that Jacob and Esau were twins, right? And to quote, right, afterward his brother came out, that is Jacob, right, with his hand holding Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob, literally, heel of the foot grabber. And that is so totally appropriate for my 500-mile walk, because feet were everybody's problem. Feet were perhaps the most common topic of conversation on the Camino de Santiago. I learned, the pre-health advisor, I think she can verify this. I learned many methods of taping blisters to both treat and prevent them. I learned how to thread blisters. And I won't explain that here, because it's gross. And doesn't really fit with the, august situation, which he asked me afterwards what threading blisters is all about. At one point, they all merged into one enormous blister across the entire bottom of my foot. I have never experienced anything like it. Every morning on the Camino, you get up and you wonder how you'll do one more day. But more on that later. First, back to Santiago. I still haven't explained how Santiago in Spanish came to mean James in English. It comes to English through Old French and Italian. You got to listen to it. Iacobus becomes Giacomus, becomes Giacomo, James in English. And according to legend, St. James the Greater, not to be confused with St. James the Lesser, also known as the brother of Jesus, or if the perpetual virginity of Mary is important to you, the cousin or stepbrother of Jesus, not that guy, the other one, the other James, the one who gets listed with Peter, James, and John, Zebedee, sons of thunder, etc. I'm not a Bible scholar, so I'm out on a limb here. But according to legend, St. James the Greater goes to Spain and spreads Christianity there. And also, according to legend, he goes back to Jerusalem where they kill him. He gets martyred. And here's where things get a little weird. There are two versions of the legend or myth that arose from this. And actually, I think I saw Professor Greenhalgh here, one of our professors in the Spanish section of modern languages, who did his master's thesis on stories and legends in the history of the Camino. So he'll correct me afterwards if I get this wrong. There are two versions of the story that I could find. In one version, after James dies in Jerusalem, his friends ship him to Spain, and so that he can be buried in what is now called Santiago, the city of Santiago. And off the coast of Spain, there's a big storm, and somehow his body goes overboard, which makes you wonder, like, what were they? They didn't tie it down or put it in the bottom or something? Were they holding it up? Anyway, somehow his body ends up in the ocean, and later it's washed up on shore, totally undamaged, uncorrupted, and covered head to toe in scallop shells, which somehow have preserved the body in a way that only legend can make sense of. Here's version 2, and just as a Bible scholar walked in. Version 2. After James' martyrdom, his body was transported by ship to Spain, piloted or driven by an angel, right, at the rudder or wheel or whatever they had back in those days. So it was this magic ship with an angel driving it all the way across the Mediterranean. And of course, as the ship gets close to land in Spain, there's a wedding going on. And the groom is on horseback, I guess, as one does in Spanish medieval weddings. And the horse sees this magic ship with an angel driving it coming, and the horse freaks out. It jumps in the ocean, and they're all going to be drowned, but through miraculous intervention, the horse and the rider emerge from the ocean covered in scallop shells. And so that's the story. And as a consequence, people of traditional belief understand that the body of St. James, his relics, are buried in Spain, in northwestern Spain, in Galicia. And in the early Middle Ages, some say as early as 868, pilgrims start traveling from their homes in Europe, walking to Santiago to pray and pay homage. During the late Middle Ages, it becomes extremely popular. Thousands of pilgrims make this walk every year in the Middle Ages. As they do so, villages spring up because Spaniards realize that with all these European pilgrims coming, there's plenty of opportunity to sell them food and sell them lodging and sell them foot care. Really. And in fact, as we did this trek, we discovered that the towns are spread out almost exactly a day's walk from each other. They're all between 15 and 20 miles from each other along the Camino. To keep pilgrims oriented, people started publishing guidebooks. In fact, it inspired the very first guidebook in European history. This version, right? This is a translated version published pretty recently, but this is a published version of the Codex Calixtinus that was published in 1140, first guidebook. And it tells you which places to avoid, where you might get robbed, and what rivers you can drink from, and which rivers have poisonous water in them. And it tells you how to take care of your feet. I'm not kidding. It even recommends that in your group of pilgrims that you find, because mostly they were peasants, and some people kind of middle class. There were some aristocrats too, but a lot of peasants. And they recommend taking like a cobbler with you to repair your shoes along the way, somebody who can help out. So back to one of my earlier questions. How do you walk 500 miles? And I know now you're thinking of the song. Don't do that. That's not involved. The first few days that you do this, you're totally carried by adrenaline. And it's beautiful. If you've never seen the French and Spanish Pyrenees, you have a treat coming in store for you when you finally do. You're walking through some of the most beautiful mountains on earth, and you meet other really cool people from all over the world. We met people from as near as Michigan and as far away as Korea. And you're all walking, you're kind of all in it together, and you're hiking along. And the food is amazing, and the wine is pretty good. And a lot cheaper than the United States. I don't really understand this, but anyway. Because then the blisters and aches and pains start to catch up with you after about 3 days. And about a weekend, I remember making it to our inn after a long day, a long like 25-mile day. I crashed on the bed, and I was asleep for about an hour, and then my wife, Jill, woke me up because it was time to go get some dinner, and I almost couldn't get up. And I hobbled the 2 blocks to the restaurant where we got a great meal, but I'm literally hobbling home thinking, how do I wake up tomorrow? I can't walk 2 blocks right now. How do I walk another 15, 17, 19 miles in the morning? And at that point, at that exact day, you know how far I'd gone if I'd started from the chapel steps here? Hagerstown. If you're Indiana, you understand, right? That's not even Richmond. Okay? I'm going to Washington, D.C., right? No, it was a kind of feeling of anxiety and panic, right? It's the same feeling I've had when I've faced other pressure-filled moments in my life. Making it through a difficult class in college, writing a dissertation, publishing my first major article, looking down at my newborn child and wondering how in the world I was going to be a father, surviving my first semester teaching at Wabash. And one of the survivors of that first class is sitting up in the corner there, Dean Welch. You all know the feeling, confronted with some enormous task. Well, the morning after that really excruciating walk from the restaurant and back to our room, something amazing happened. A good night's sleep. And everybody says, get a good night's sleep, right? Everybody tells you that. And you may think it's a cliche, and you may think it's something that just your parents or others will tell you, but I'm here to tell you from personal experience that at the lowest, most difficult points on the Camino this past summer, it was that good night's sleep that got me in the place, both physically and mentally, that let me get up in the morning, tape up my blisters, fill up the Camelback, stretch out my hamstrings, and start walking. I wasn't sure about getting to Santiago, but I thought I might be able to make it to lunch. And I did. And after that, a few more miles. And after that, our destination for the day. One more day in the books, another hobbling shuffle to dinner, another night's sleep, rinse and repeat. After 3 weeks, my blisters, they were still there, but they weren't as bad. And after 4 weeks, my feet had really started to callus up. After 5 weeks, I basically had hobbit feet. I'm not kidding. Mile after mile, week after week, my muscles tightened up. I lost a few pounds, may have put a couple back on. And the Camino started turning me from a sedentary Spanish professor into a pilgrim. And then, one day, we were there. And the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela, one of the most beautiful historic structures in all of Europe, rose up in front of us. So one of the main things I took away from that experience was a deeper understanding of what we, on this campus, and I know it sounds cliche, but I'm going to say it anyway, the motto, really the feeling and the energy that we summon up with the motto, Wabash always fights. Now, we often associate that motto with glorious comebacks, a spectacular Jose Franco interception. And I'm talking about his first one. Many of you may not remember, back in 2018, we were playing Wisconsin Stevens Point here. And his interception allowed us to go up 3 near the end of the game and win that game. Or Jack Davidson stepping in and raining down 3-pointers against any number of opponents. I think we run into trouble, though, if we assume that not backing down and continuing the fight is all about sports, real highlight moments, and the perfect endings to David and Goliath narratives. Wabash always fights also means figuring out a way to walk 15 more miles when you don't think you can muster the energy to do so. When you're a pilgrim, the only way to get all the way to Santiago is 15 or so miles at a time. Thinking about the enormity of the walk will overwhelm you. At your lowest moments. I had to remind myself time and time again, you don't have to make it to Santiago today. All you have to do is make it to the next village. Put enough of those small, doable, ordinary victories together, and you accomplish something extraordinary. You need to believe me when I tell you that it's no different than a Wabash student who answers his alarm on a dark November morning, 9 weeks into a 14-week semester, with final papers, projects, labs, and exams out on the December horizon, and refuses the urge to just get back in bed, who realizes you don't have to take the exam or finish the paper today. You just need to make some progress. You just need to haul your tired, you know what, a few more miles down the road. How do students learn OChem or a foreign language or multivariable calculus? 1 hour at a time. Remembering the now somewhat tired Ralph Waldo Emerson quote, it's not the destination, it's the journey. I don't know. Let me rephrase it. How do students learn OChem or a foreign language or multivariable calculus or accomplish any other seemingly impossible task when that anxious worry sets in? They do it by putting one foot in front of the other, by putting pencil to paper, by getting themselves to class or to the library, softly whispering to themselves, Wabash always fights, and I belong at Wabash. And when I least feel like it, I will always fight. Thank you, gentlemen.